Welcome to part 6 of the Great War. Now we're going to take a look at America entering the war. Now, oftentimes it is mistakenly believed that the sinking of the Lusitania on May 7, 1915 brought the United States into World War I, but it's not true. The United States actually won't enter the war for another 2 years until early 1917. It did have an effect, and the United States did respond to the sinking of the Lusitania, but it wasn't so far as entering the war, right? The sinking of the Lusitania had to do with the way submarine warfare was being conducted by the Germans, and that's what made it a particularly politically explosive act, right? You see, submarine warfare had an etiquette to it. I know this sounds a little strange, but just follow me on this for a little bit. This is the way that you handled submarine warfare. The submarine would approach a merchant ship, right? It surfaces, hails merchant ship, informs merchant ship that they intend to sink said merchant ship. Merchant ship then has time to get their crew onto lifeboats, and then the ship is sunk. Okay. Sound strange? Yeah, it does sound a little strange, but here's the reason why you did this. These merchant ships are just piloted by civilians, right? They're not seen as combatants, so it's seen as dishonorable. It violates the rules of war for you to just blatantly kill, especially by surprise, civilians, right? Innocent civilians, right? So there's an etiquette. You surface, you warn them, and then you sink them. Okay. And the Germans were doing this. But the problem was that the British, who had not developed the convoy system yet, they'll develop that later in the war, and then in World War II, they'll have to remember how to do that, right, in order to protect their ships. The British decided at first, what if we did this? What if we created fake pilot houses on our ships, on our cargo ships, and hid an offensive deck gun on it, right? So then when the German submarine surfaces and says, hey, I'm going to sink you, all of a sudden the walls come off of this pilot ship, or this pilot house, and there's a gun there, and they start blasting the submarine. Well, okay, that's well and good, and yeah, that maybe protects that merchant ship, but now all of a sudden the Germans are going, hold on a second. If you are putting armaments on your cargo ships, they're no longer civilian ships. They're combatant ships. These are combatants, which means we don't have to tell them we're going to sink them. And so that's what they start to do. They start to commence on what's called unrestricted submarine warfare. They no longer surface and warn them. They just attack them, usually submerged with torpedoes, and sink them and just leave them where they are because they're now combat ships, okay? Now, everybody, when they start doing that, everybody starts going, oh my God, the dastardly, evil Germans that are attacking these poor civilian ships without warning. And of course, the Germans are like, what are you talking about? You're arming these things, right? So that brings us to the Lusitania. Okay, well, all right. So how do we create the narrative then that the Germans are evil in attacking the Lusitania in a time of war? Well, okay, well, hold on a second. First of all, this is not a merchant ship. This is a passenger ship. The Lusitania is a passenger liner. So clearly it's not an armed, even an armed merchant ship. So clearly that makes the Germans dastardly. Well, here's the thing, though. The Lusitania is a large passenger ship, right? It's on the size, not as big as the Titanic, but it's on the same scale, right? It's a very big ship. The ship sunk in 18 minutes when it was struck by 2 torpedoes from U-20 on May 7th, 1915. 18 minutes. Now let's put this in perspective. The Titanic, which was bigger, but not significantly bigger, had been ripped from nose to tail, from bow to stern, by an iceberg, and took over 2 hours to sink, long enough for the band to play a whole set. Okay? The Lusitania, a large ship, was struck by 2 torpedoes and sunk in 18 minutes. Why did it sink so fast? Well, the reason why is the torpedoes set up the copious amounts of ammunition that this ship was carrying to England. And the British and the Germans knew this, right? They both knew that cargo passenger ships were being used to move munitions, which again, no longer makes it just a passenger ship. It is now a potential combatant, right? Because it's carrying war munitions, okay? Why do you put those in passenger ships? That seems like a stupid thing to do. Well, because passenger ships are significantly faster than cargo ships, because the whole idea is to get the passengers across the ocean as fast as possible. A passenger ship like the Lusitania can outrun a submarine, either on the surface or submerged. U-20 just had the angle, if you will, to get to the ship. Okay, so, well, what about this? Okay, so maybe the munitions make it where the Lusitania was a valid target, but they should have at least warned them. Ah, but they did. See, if you take a look here, here is the schedule for the Lusitania, right? But if you look at that notice right underneath this is the New York Times. It says, notice travelers intending to embark on the Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and her allies in Great Britain and her allies. And it goes on to say that those traveling in British waters do so at their own risk. They're basically saying, hey guys, don't get on this ship. We're going to sink it. Right? So they did warn them. They warned them that this is what they were planning to do. And ultimately it's exactly what they did. Okay. Now, Woodrow Wilson in the United States will have a reaction to this. They will condemn the act. They will, and they'll send a warning to the Kaiser saying, hey, look, if you do stuff like this and you're killing Americans in the process, we're going to have to get involved. Right? Now, the Kaiser already knows that the Americans who claim to be neutral, Woodrow Wilson said we're neutral, are not really neutral. They're actually sending, by 1917, they're sending $2 billion worth of loans and aids and material to the Triple Entente, the Western powers, per year at that point. But the last thing they want is American soldiers, too. So he says, all right, no, sorry, we will not do unrestricted submarine warfare anymore. We'll cease this and see how far we can get without it. And they will, for a while. Now, the fact that Woodrow Wilson had avoided getting involved in that war in Europe actually played well for him in his re-election bid there in 1916, right? He avoided even that possibility of war in the incident there in May of 1915, and he's even going to campaign on it, right? Wilson is going to campaign in the re-election tour saying, Woodrow Wilson, he kept us out of war, right? Now, this is kind of a ridiculous thing that Wilson's doing here, and for this reason. He knows full well that eventually the United States is going to be in this war. He's avoided it this far. But he also knows that if he says, hey, we need to get involved in this war, he won't get reelected. So he is going to campaign on the idea of staying out of this European war, despite the fact that he, one, knows full well we are going to get in this war, and two, he wants us to get involved in this war, because he sees the writing on the wall. Europe is going to look entirely different when the war is over. And if you want a seat at the negotiation tables to decide what that post-war Europe looks like, you got to be involved in it. Otherwise, how do you justify a seat at this table? Okay? And so he is going to campaign on peace, even though knowing that he needs to get into the war. Now, he gets reelected pretty easily there in November of 1916. And then everything really just falls in his lap. Before he even takes his oath of office for his second term, he's got every justification to declare war on Germany. The first thing that happens on February 1st, 1917, Germany announces we stopped doing unrestricted submarine warfare, and it's just not working. We're not cutting the supplies we need to cut off from the British Isles. Sorry, guys, we're going to start it up again. Just be forewarned. Do not be in British waters. We will sink ships there. All right, you are warned. Woodrow Wilson's response to that was to cut all diplomatic ties with Germany on February 3rd. And then the final straw, the thing that really pushed things over the top, was the thing called the Zimmermann telegram. German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann had sent the German ambassador to Mexico, a guy by the name of Count Johann von Bernstorff, a telegram instructing him to offer Mexico financial aid and military supplies if they would enter an alliance with Germany against the United States in case of any future aggression. And said, if Mexico promises to declare war on the United States if they get involved in this war here, we promise to give Mexico all the supplies that they need, and we promise that we will make sure they get back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Effectively, the Mexican secession from the Mexican-American War, minus California. They didn't include California. I don't know why. Maybe even the Germans said, nobody wants California. Okay. So the result of this coded telegram that gets sent to the the German ambassador to Mexico doesn't result in Mexico declaring war on the United States, but it does result in the British intercepting it and decoding it, right? They decode it and read and go, oh my goodness, they can't wait to get this to the Americans. On the 26th of February, 1917, Woodrow Wilson learns about the Zimmerman telegram, and now he has all the justification that he needs to go in front of Congress as soon as they come into session in April of 1917 and ask for an official declaration of war. Which is exactly what he's going to do. On April 2nd, 1970, Congress will begin its session. In a joint session of Congress, he's going to stand before them and give a speech in which he's going to ask for an official declaration of war against the nation of Germany. The U.S. Senate will approve war by a vote of 82 to 6 with 8 not voting, and the House of Representatives will approve it by a vote of 373 to 50 with 9 non-voting. Now, an interesting component of all this is one of the new members of the House of Representatives, and that is a new representative from the state of Montana by the name of Jeannette Rankin. Jeannette Rankin is the first woman ever elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. And she is going to take her seat on the House on the day of this speech. This is her first day on the job, representing Montana, first day on the job, President of the United States asking for a declaration of war. That's a crazy first day, huh? It's made worse by the fact that she's a pacifist. She's a pacifist, first woman in Congress, first day on the job, asked to declare war on Germany. So when we take a look at that vote, 373 to 50, 9 not voting, one of the 50 who voted no against declaring war on Germany is going to be Jeannette Rankin, right? Now, the result of this, when she came up for re-election there 2 years later, she is going to be voted out of office. She'll go away. But she will maintain involved in Montana politics. As a matter of fact, in 1940, she'll run for the House of Representatives again, and she will be elected to the House of Representatives again, representing the state of Montana, which means that she will be sitting in front of a joint session of Congress on December 8th, 1941. When a new president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, is going to stand before this joint session because the previous day, a day that will live in infamy, the Japanese had attacked American forces at Pearl Harbor and elsewhere. And he was there on December 8th asking Congress for a declaration of war against Japan. Jeannette Rankin, the pacifist. Like, oh no, really? Again? The declaration of war on Japan was unanimous. Almost. One person voted against declaring war on Japan, Jeannette Rankin. So she holds the distinction of having voted against both world wars. Now, the U.S. role in World War I is actually quite limited. I mean, think about it. April of 1917 is when they declare war. Well, that means that the war is going to be over a little bit over a year later, right? That's only 18 months away from the end of the war. The first troops are not going to hit the European theater until October 21st in 1917, when elements of the United States 1st Infantry Division will arrive in France, right? So that means the first troops don't actually even hit the trenches until 13 months before the war is over. And even then, they're not going to get involved in any heavy combat, not until May of 1918, quite literally 6 months before the war is over. On May 28, 1918, the 1st Infantry Division, under Major General Robert Lee Bullard, will lead 4,000 troops to attack a small French village called Cantigny, held by the German 18th Army. Now, they're going to take this village, but they're going to take a 25% casualty rate too. Of the 4,000 men, 1,076 will go down as casualties. Remember, like I said, these are killing fields here, right? And anytime you take an offensive and you try and take a position, you're going to lose a lot of men. So the 1st Infantry is going to be the first one to see any serious action, but only when there's 6 months of war left, right? The Marines, the United States Marines, will get involved in the fighting too. Matter of fact, between June 6 and June 26 of 1918, the United States 1st Marine Division is actually going to fight in a place called the Battle of Belleau Wood, right, part of the Chateau Thierry offensive. They would fight so tenaciously that the Germans would actually begin to refer to the U.S. Marines as Teufelhunden, or devil dogs, and that's a name that actually sticks, right? Matter of fact, the Marines are going to use that to campaign by putting a Marine hat on an English bulldog, right? And that's still the unofficial mascot of the Marine Corps today, right? Again, a lot of casualties. The Battle of Belleau Woods is going to result in 9,777 Marine casualties, including 1,811 dead. Today, the Belleau Woods are called Bois de la Brigade des Marines, right? It's named after the United States Marine Corps. The final battle that the United States will get involved in is the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, right? If you go onto even Wikipedia and just Google deadliest campaigns in American military history, the Meuse-Argonne Offensive is number 1. It began on September 26, 1918, and will continue until the armistice, the end of the war, on November 11th. In that approximately 45 days, you're going to have 26,277 American soldiers dead in this offensive, right? But in this 6 months of heavy fighting, you're going to have a lot of casualties. Like I said, World War I truly is a killing field, right? Between the American entrance into the war there and onto the front lines and into heavy battle in May of 1918 and Armistice Day, right, November 11th, 1918, when the fighting stopped, the U.S. is going to suffer 323,018 casualties and 116,516 dead, right? To do the math on that, that's approximately 620 killed per day. Compare that to something like, say, the Vietnam War, where you had 57,000 killed, but across 10 years, right? It is a very deadly war. And it's no wonder that a lot of these men will leave suffering from things like shell shock, right? Today we call this post-traumatic stress disorder. Shell shock, they actually believed it was a physical ailment. It was from the concussion of the artillery barrages causing your brain to bounce around in your head, bruising your brain, and causing you to have these psychological breakdowns, right? Today there's actually something for that. It's called CTE, right? But what was really going on was men were literally snapping because of the stress. Artillery barrages that made it where you felt safer going over the top into machine gun fire than staying in the trenches. So shell shock is what they called it back then, but today, like I said, we know it's post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD.